Welcome back to Perspectives with Asima Silva. Last week we had Dr. Abdullah Brown, who as a doctor was in Gaza and had just returned. And as you know, a lot of these people I meet in my life as I am encountering, doing things, being an activist or attending a conference and whatnot. And I've had the privilege of meeting really, really interesting people. And as you know, last week, that's why I asked Dr. Brown, who I met in DC in front of the Capitol, while he was doing a press release because a bunch of doctors had just returned from Gaza. A week before that, I actually was at a local meeting with Congressman McGovern. It was held at one of the churches in Worcester, and it was organized by, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and the topic of it was Palestine. And in that particular meeting, we have our guest today who obviously intrigued me. As you know, most of my guests are people intrigue me. They say something and I approach them and I say, please, I want you on my show. I want to hear your perspective. I want to have a conversation. And so Mark G., he is the, and I wanted to get this right, International Committee Facilitator for the Worcester DSA. And his comment really stood out from the crowd. And I just got so intrigued. I want to know his background. I want to know why he got involved on this topic, why he came to his conclusion of the stance on this topic, and what was his research. So thank you so much for joining and coming here tonight, joining me at the studio. And it's our first time. That meeting was our first time we had ever met. And what motivated you? Because it was just a meeting of, I think, opened to the interfaith community, trying to get everyone together to talk about Palestine and putting our case in front of the Congressman McGovern. So what interested you in showing up that day?
Sure. First, Asima, thank you for having me on your show. I watched a few episodes prior to coming on. I think you're a very good interviewer. And to answer your question, Worcester DSA has been pretty strongly involved with the pro-Palestine movement since October 6th and before, or October 7th and before. And we had been going to other events and been hosting rallies as well, working with the Greater Islamic Society of Worcester. And we heard that Congressman Jim McGovern, whom we had a rally outside of his office previously, was going to be speaking, so we figured this would be a prime opportunity to have our voices heard. And in many ways, I'm glad that I was able to ask my question last, because there's so many other voices there that had direct experience with a lot of this pain and suffering that's going on in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. So it was nice that, we were held off to the last to ask sort of our last question there.
Would you mind sharing with our audience what your question was so that we're all on the same page of what intrigued me at your which was your comment?
Sure. So essentially what Congressman McGovern and sort of the Democratic Party as a whole have been pushing as sort of their sort of spin on the narrative is that this is all Netanyahu's fault. Like, this is not Netanyahu. The individual is sort of responsible as sort of the top-down leader of Israel for the genocidal activities that Israel has been undergoing. But you only need sort of like a cursory understanding of sort of Israeli politics and the history of that nation to understand that is simply not the case. The question that we posed to him specifically was that on February, I think it was 10th, a poll came out from it was one of the Israeli newspapers that had sort of polled Israeli opinions on the war and how it was going. And if I could look it up on my phone to get the exact facts and figures, but essentially a large majority of people believe that Netanyahu is not doing enough in Gaza. And so the party line that the Democratic Party is putting forward, that it's all Netanyahu's fault, that it's not the sort of Israeli people, is patently just false. It's not true. If they remove Netanyahu, which they seem to be wanting to do, someone else will replace him who will continue the policies of sort of the Israeli settler colonial project, which is to oust every Palestinian out of Gaza and replace them with Jewish settlers.
So, I mean, that's a very powerful statement, and I appreciate that you're basing it on, stats and polls and whatnot, but that goes against the narrative of what we hear in the media, that there are plenty of people, Israelis, who are asking for Netanyahu to step down because they don't like the policies. But is that what you're saying, or you're saying that's only a minority?
Well, there certainly is a minority of people in Israel who are sort of on the side of the angels, as it were, and want the violence to stop. Like, there was the coalition for peace building that was happening between Palestinians and Israelis before all of this happened. So I imagine there must be people in Israel who want this violence to end. But I think that that sort of judging based on the polls that we've been looking at, that the majority of Israelis are fine with the war's execution, fine with the genocide and how it's going, and simply think that not enough is being done to drive the Palestinians off. Anything short of a second Nakba that's just it.
I'm going to ask you a devil's advocate. Would you be labeled anti-Semitic for saying that?
I don't believe that criticism of a nation state, criticism of Israel is or should be considered anti-Semitic. I think if anything, it is anti-Semitic to sort of lump in the entirety of the Jewish people, who are a broad and varied and sort of multifaceted group of people who have experienced a lot of historical turmoil and hardship. To lump them into a settler colonial project such as the State of Israel, I think does them a great disservice. As in fact, I can't think of anything sort of more anti-Semitic than that, is to say that all Jewish people are behind the genocidal actions of the nation state of Israel.
The reason why I'm asking is when you say like majority of Israelis feel, the genocide should be done at a more larger scale. People very immediately, have you found that people start associating the fact that you said most Israelis as you're saying most Jews?
Well, I think that it's a fair question, and to answer it, I would say that it doesn't really account for the Jewish people that live outside of Israel. I think there's a huge diaspora community that lives outside of Israel that is not particularly fond of the genocide that's being done in their name. And you just have to look to these encampments that have sprung up, many of them being led by Jewish students at these universities. Many of the people who are pro-Palestinian in the United States, like Jewish Voice for Peace, like many of these other sort of organizations, I would not ever characterize them as being, party to what the nation state of Israel is doing. And I think, as sort of stated previously, it does the Jewish people a great disservice to equate the two things.
No, I really appreciate you saying and bringing up the topic of that a lot of these encampments are being led by Jewish students as well, and I think that kind of gets lost in some of the media coverage. So that's extremely important in my opinion. When you have Jewish students leading, that means they're saying not in my name. They're acting upon, not just saying not in my name. What I wanted to know was, how did you come across this particular topic? There's a lot of people that I meet. I think growing up Jewish, you might know about this topic because, you have an association with Israel. Growing up Muslim, you have an association with this topic because Palestine and Jerusalem is considered one of the holy lands, and Palestine is, in Jerusalem especially, is the third holiest city of Islam. So, there's reasons of why we're exposed to this particular topic and issue. I'm just wondering, and I think that's what intrigued me about your comment is, how did you come to know more about this topic? A lot of people, even if they know about this topic, they didn't dive into it enough to know the details the way you knew it. And I'm very curious on what drove you to know more, and what exposed you?
Sure. So I think for a very long time, I had sort of avoided the topic of Israel-Palestine relations because it was a very touchy subject, I think. Then, the attacks on October 7th happened, and I was told to do my research by Israelis, by people who were encouraging of that. And then I did my research, and I was truly horrified by what I found. It doesn't take an advanced degree to sort of understand when a crime is being committed, and especially a crime of that size committed against a group of people. When I was in college, I took a Holocaust studies course, and I focused in that on that study on the policies and practices of companies that were involved in the Holocaust and how they managed to profit from that. And I very much think, because my sort of political bent as a socialist, that you will see if you take a materialist analysis of this, this is a war that's being waged on not just a ethnic group of people, but also on the land itself. The bulldozer is as much a weapon of war and a weapon of genocide as is the tanks and the guns and the bombs. And the plan for Palestine, even though I don't sort of know the specifics of it, I think the shape of it will look very similar to what you saw in Iraq and Afghanistan after the U.S. invasions. And it can only bode poorly for the Palestinian people should the Israelis get what they want.
So you said you took the opportunity to research, and that's what you found out. Where did you go to do this research? Because if people go to media, they're going to get one-sided. Where was your research coming from?
Well, I read some of Franz Fanon. I studied up on some of Dr. Norman Finkelstein's work. I attended a talk that he gave that was actually put on, I think, by Jewish Voice for Peace. We are bombarded every day on social media of images of mutilated children and destroyed hospitals, and time again, we're told not to look at these things, but we simply just cannot look away.
Yeah. I agree with you. I mean, I used to be very careful on what I would post on social media, being cognizant of there's people out there who, there's triggers and may cause trauma, but with what is going on and our tax dollars funding, I felt that we don't have the right now to start looking away. And people who may have triggers, I think they need to be more careful themselves rather than having other people block it from their feeds and not be aware of what's going on. So I agree with you in that sense that we can't turn away. We, as much as we don't want to see this horrific actions, to understand the horrificness of it, we sometimes need to be exposed to it. So what would you recommend for others who, you took the advantage and took the advice to do the research. There's plenty of people out there who don't. I've been in situations where people have said to me, it's such a complicated issue, and which honestly to me is a cop-out. That just means they want to take the easy way out. They want to have someone else tell them what they should believe instead of them making their own decision. And the greatest thing about this country is we get to make our own decisions. We get to do our own research, and we get to vote the way we want to and speak on the politics and the issues the way we want to. But there are plenty of people out there who are saying, oh, it's just a complicated issue, or they are afraid because they've been trained not to talk about this particular issue. What would you recommend for those people?
I think training is a very apt way to describe the reaction that you're getting from these people. I think they're approaching it with a closed mind. Like they say, I've learned all that I need to learn, and I can learn no more. And that is, once you sort of stop growing, you start dying. I think that if you approach the topic with an open mind, even if you're not like me, if you're not a socialist, I think you'll find that it's not terribly complicated at all. You have a group of people who have lived in Palestine for a very long time, with a wide background of religion, social backgrounds. You have, Christians, Jews, and Muslims all living in Palestine, and all of them are being persecuted by the Israeli state. I just saw the other day an elderly Jewish man get shot down by an IDF soldier simply for being a Palestinian Jewish man and not born on the right side of the wall. So I think that what is desired by by the sort of the ruling elite, by the sort of political class, the capitalist class that owns the papers and owns the news and owns the universities, is that people approach this with a closed mind, with their solutions and their conclusions rather already pre-configured, and then to fill in the details for the rest of it. And in order to learn and to grow and to not enter this sort of closed-minded space, you have to just approach it with an open mind, as though you do not know of any of the sort of the context in which it is from, and then devote yourself to learning it sort of with that open mind and not with any preconceived notions of it.
So now that you have this information, and obviously you are speaking out about it because you did show up to that meeting, have you found, what's a reaction from the people you've talked to or advocated for Palestine for? What was their reaction up till now?
I think when perhaps my social circles are not as are pretty sort of diverse and somewhat broad, but most people, I think, most people I've talked to at least are anti-genocide and pro-Palestine. Nobody likes a genocide except for people who stand to gain from it. I think the worst I've gotten so far is sort of a passive silence from people who either may or may not agree with me, but don't really want to speak up on the matter, one way or the other. And I think that in and of itself is progress for some. I think previously those people would be very full-throated in their defense of sort of the Israeli apartheid. But now, it goes to show that the tide has turned, that no matter what happens now, we cannot go back to the way things were, which unfortunately seems to be what our leaders in Congress and our leaders in the White House and the Senate seem to want to happen, is just a return back to before October 7th. But there is no return to that. We can only go forward,
right.
And we can only fight for a better future.
What do you say to those people who say, well, are you aware of what happened on October 7th? We needed to protect our country and our state from terrorist attacks like that.
I would say to them that, sure, as a nation state, I suppose you can make that argument. However, what about October 6th? What about 1948? What about all of these other times when the state of Palestine was crushed and divided up and stolen from its legal inhabitants and auctioned off to foreign-born settlers? I don't think that I don't believe that a nation state has a right to put people into an open-air concentration camp and force them to live there for 70 years with no expectation of ever leaving, and then be surprised that colonial violence is met with a liberatory violence, a violence of the oppressed against the oppressor. I I'm not a violent person. I don't think that the violence should be the first option, but it certainly wasn't for the Palestinians. If you look back to prior to October 7th, they tried every single legal means by which to protest, and they were brutally cracked down every single time. So if you say to me, what about October 7th? You must have been born yesterday, because you don't know anything that happened prior to that, it seems.
I think you put it really eloquently. You're the first person that I've actually heard say that, it's you can't cage a person and expect them to constantly just passively resist. At some point, it's going to break. They're going to take a violent route because they've tried and tried and tried in a passive resistance. Thank you for saying that, because I think that goes to human psychology and human behavior. It's pretty much expected. Mm-hmm. And as much as we would love, in theory, to say no one should ever get violent, I think reality shows that you can't cage an animal or a human and expect that there won't be any violence ever. But I guess the question I would have, what do you envision the future is? Since you do have a lot more information on this topic, and you, with the background and research you've done in education that you have, what do you see the future being?
So, to a minor correction, I don't have a fancy degree. I just have a bachelor's of science, specifically in emergency management. I've spent a lot of my life looking at disasters, and it has the only real sort of path that I see that will create a lasting peace would be a single secular Palestinian state that is free for all peoples to live in, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to not only look at sort of the most recent crimes of Israel, but to look back into the past and look back at the war crimes that have been committed. And this is, that would be the only way to create a lasting peace, a two-state solution that's being presented by some of the more progressive members of the Democratic Party might buy time, but ultimately, you're still leaving sort of the Palestinian people in the lurch. And just sort of very much returns things to sort of how they were, and that's all they're trying to do.
No, I agree with you. I think the divided two-state solution only will create more division rather than the unity of we are one nation, which I would love it if it was called Palestine, but I think that triggers some emotions to a lot of people, because instead of understanding that it means a state of unity of all religions and faiths and being more secular, they take it as you're eradicating an area for the Israelis or Jews to call homeland. And I think that triggers some emotion. Do you find that when you maybe propose this kind of future?
Yes, but it's something that must be fought. I think that the people who feel that way maybe should look into a mirror and examine themselves and think, am I saying this because I actually fear that this is what will happen to me, or am I saying this because I fear what we have done to the Palestinian people will be visited upon us? I think the only way that we can sort of prevent the cycle of violence from continuing is by allowing this sort of this unity, this peace, this one Palestinian state to occur. And how it will happen is definitely beyond me. I think that's, right. You'd have to, I think you would need an advanced degree to sort of to mess that one out. But I think the end goal is a good and just and noble one, and one that is the most equitable and the most fair for all people involved.
We have like a couple minutes we've been having a great time. The time passed.
Oh yeah, sure.
What would you like to share with us in terms of our audience? What would you want them to know, to walk away with? on this topic?
Sure. I think one of the biggest questions that people at home are asking right now is, what can we do? We are so far away. We are sort of in the heart of the imperial machine that is funding and arming and allowing this to occur. What can I do as an individual? And I'm going to start off by saying something that's maybe a little depressing and sad. But as an individual, not a lot can be done. However, if you join up with an organization, like, I'm going to shout out to Worcester DSA as a Worcester DSA member, but even if that's socialism isn't your bag, there's plenty of other great organizations like the Congressional District 2 group that we are both in, who has been agitating for change at the sort of congressional level. Jewish Voices for Peace. If you're a student, you can join your local Students for Justice in Palestine. If you're at a college campus that doesn't have an encampment, you and a few friends could get together and get some tents and put them out in the quad. I think what we must do is we have to organize sort of as a popular front to push for these changes on our side of things, because we're the ones at the money tap. Yep. If we are able to get our politicians to listen, or barring that, to throw ourselves into the gears and the levers and to make the war machine stop, I think we can do something. It is not all hopeless. We must have perhaps a pessimism of the mind and an optimism of the heart, and the will to use our hands to bring justice.
Thank you so much. That was excellent. To wrap up, what I learned from this show is, I thought it was eloquently said, that when people talk about Palestine, they are referring to a secular state that actually welcomes people of all faiths under one nation state. I think that we need to work on changing the narrative and changing how we view this word. Instead of Palestine equals anti-Israel, it should be looked as Palestine equals peace for all people. And I think that was an excellent lesson that I learned from this show today. I hope you join us again on Perspectives with Asima Silva.